Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're doing something really exciting. We're finally starting our fish breeding journey. Now the fish that I've chosen, as you can probably tell by the title, is called a Gertrude. There's a couple of different scientific names for the species, but the one that I'm pretty confident that I've got is called a Blue Eye Luminatus. Now I'm not going to try and pronounce that correctly throughout the video, we're just going to call it a Gertrude for short. So obviously Gertrudes are a really pretty fish. However, there's a couple of different reasons why I chose this fish to start the breeding journey. The first and most important reason is that they're super hardy fish. They can tolerate a wide range of pH and temperature. I'm going to put that up on screen if you want to know how to take care of them. But the main reason for choosing this fish for me is because they're a mid-range fish to breed. They're not particularly as easy as guppies, but they're also not as difficult as discus. If we're using a guppy to discus scale of how difficult it is to breed a fish, they're definitely going to be falling in the middle. Now they're not as easy as a minnow or a CPD in terms of an egg scattering fish where you can easily extract the eggs and just raise the fry in a separate box. They're actually egg layers, which means we're going to be using some breeding mobs. Now for me, I think that's a perfect level to start at and to do some experimentation. This is also really exciting because I finally get to use the rack behind me that's kind of been sitting dormant for a while. I have some guppies in there that we need to clean out, and that's essentially what we're going to do in this video. We're going to set up the breeding rack for the Gertrudes and we're going to be placing them in their breeding environment. Now this is going to be video one of a short series where we cover the entire breeding process step by step, with the end goal of eventually having a sufficient school to put in my main tank, which none of you guys have actually seen yet, but we'll be revealing that pretty soon on the channel. So without any further ado, let's get these tanks cleaned up and introduce our fish to their new breeding environment. So resetting these first two tanks was actually really easy. I did this in a specific way because I didn't want to crash the cycle on either of them, and that was mainly because I wanted to immediately introduce the fish for this experiment. So on tank 1 I'm only going to be removing some of the substrate and cleaning it thoroughly, and tank 2 I'm completely replacing the substrate. However, I'm going to reuse the filters from these tanks as they're already colonized by beneficial bacteria, and it'll help me to cycle the tanks really quickly. I'm replacing the substrate with Aquatic soil. My main reason for doing that is because it will buffer the pH to what the fish are already used to in their previous tank, and it gives me confidence that I don't have to worry about a parameter swing in such a small environment. While these tanks are filling up and we're waiting for the dust to settle, I went ahead and cleaned up some of the floating debris and then moved on to the next two tanks. So these next two tanks took quite a bit longer to clean because there was quite a bit of guppy spawn that I was completely unaware of. As you can see, green water and guppy grass make excellent hiding places for these fish. Once I had caught them all out and drained the water, I went ahead and reset these tanks completely. We'll still be using them for breeding cycles, however, these will only be for the second and third cycle, which should give us more than enough time to cycle them from scratch. After cleaning the tanks thoroughly and wiping them down with some hydrogen peroxide to make sure there were no snails, I went ahead and added some Aquatic soil like I did with the other tanks, but in this case I was using brand new filters and a little bit of bacterial powder to kickstart the cycles. All that was left to do for these tanks was allow them to fill up and start the cycle. I added the lids and moved back to the first tank to complete the setup so we could add our fish. So now that the Aquatic dust had settled and we could actually see inside the tank, I went ahead and added my plants. For this I'm using a shorter version of Vallisneria, mainly because I want a plant that will continue to grow on its own steam and require very little maintenance. It's obviously a very small tank and I want to disrupt it as little as possible to make sure that the focus is on breeding and not on stressing out the fish. After that, all that was left to do was add our fish, and to be quite honest, they actually seemed pretty chill for fish that had just been moved from their home. After that, I went ahead and added the spawning media, in this case a common spawning mop. I made this out of yarn and a small piece of a pool noodle. I'll show you guys how to make that in a future video. After that, all I did was mark all the tanks so we could accurately keep track of what goes where, and also just to make the setup look a little bit neater. Last but not least, I did add a healthy amount of seed shrimp just to give the fish something to chase and an option for live food. Obviously this will promote protein uptake and hopefully influence our spawning rates. Well guys, there you have it. Our very first breeding rack is set up and running, and all we need to do now is wait for them to lay some eggs. This video is going to constitute a setup, and the next will be the first breeding cycle. I'm going to split them up cycle by cycle so that we can easily and accurately determine the different types of success rates that we get when we feed them different foods or use different spawning medias. The first two medias that I'm going to use are conventional spawn mops, and I'll show you how to make those in the next video. I also want to try some Scotch-Brite, and then last but not least, we're going to use some moss to see if we can effectively get them to lay eggs and then move the moss manually afterwards. I also want to say a massive shout out to Stefanus from MF Aquatics, who gave me these fish to start the breeding project. Thank you very much. I appreciate the support. If you're keen to see the results, make sure you don't miss any of the other episodes by hitting the subscribe button down below. If you already have, you're awesome. Continue being awesome, and I'll see you guys in the next video.